Imagine someone you love simply disappearing, without a note, without a warning, without leaving a trace. Now imagine that 30 years later, this person returns, alive, but with no memory, no past, without even knowing who you are. It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But believe me, this story is real, raw, and deeply moving. And I assure you, the truth behind this disappearance is much darker and unbelievable than any fiction would dare to write. Many people believe that time erases all wounds. Wrong. Time only teaches us to live with them. For 3 decades, a family lived, between hope and fear, between loneliness and the desperate search for understanding. What they didn't know was that the story hid silent horrors, a battle for survival, where the power of kindness, courage, and the capacity for forgiveness would be put to the test like never before. It's one of those stories that, when you understand what really happened, you'll never look at life the same way again. Get ready, because in the next few minutes you'll be moved, outraged, and above all, deeply inspired. You'll discover that sometimes life holds the most incredible new beginnings, precisely for those who have already lost everything. And that humanity, when it embraces kindness and love, can be capable of rebuilding even what seemed irretrievably lost. On that sunny morning of any given day, Lucas left the house as if he promised to return soon. He gave his little son a quick kiss on the forehead, winked at his wife with that usual look of affection, and disappeared through the door. Everything seemed normal, until the hours stretched on without return, and the phone insisted on remaining silent. Fear began to seep through the cracks in the house, growing with each frustrated knock on the door, with each unanswered phone call. It was as if Lucas had evaporated into thin air. Not a letter, not a note, not a trace that could be followed. Loneliness and insecurity settled firmly in the family's heart, while the city, perplexed, plunged into a frantic search for answers that seemed to slip through their fingers. Lucas's disappearance quickly made headlines. Reporters waved microphones in the devastated wife's face, asking questions that even she couldn't answer. Social media was abuzz with theories, some heartbreaking, others shocking and even outrageous. Some suggested an escape, some talked about a kidnapping, some came up with 1,000 far-fetched explanations. But for those who loved Lucas, all that was left was an open wound, which hurt every morning without news. Their little son, with his innocent eyes, asked every day, "Is Daddy back yet?" And each question was a stab of compassion, a cruel test, for the trust and hope that were fighting to keep from dying. It was in these moments that the true wisdom of life began to teach that sometimes the greatest act of strength is simply waiting. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Lucas's family clung to the memory of the loving man who would never have abandoned his family. They believed, with a faith steeped in respect, humility, and love, that something much greater was happening, something that logic could not yet explain. To cope with his absence, Lucas's wife clung to small daily routines, making breakfast as if he were about to arrive, tidying the room as if he might come in at any moment, keeping alive the sincerity of that love that time insisted on testing. Each gesture was an act of resistance, a reminder that true humanity is revealed in the silent struggle of those who do not give up, even when the whole world seems to have forgotten. And deep down, a spark of inspiration began to whisper that perhaps Lucas's story was just beginning. Time, which is said to heal all wounds, seemed to only deepen the scar left by Lucas's absence. Elisa, his wife, tried to live, or at least pretend to live, caught in a cruel dilemma between hope and devastating loneliness. She never made her husband's death official. For her, declaring Lucas dead would be like murdering him a second time. She kept his name on her documents, his picture in her living room, his scent in her memory. Every birthday she left an empty chair at the table, as if she were waiting for the door to open and for him to appear smiling. It was a morning without a body, without an end, without a truce, a battle between love and fear, between compassion and the silent anger of fate. And yet, in every gesture of hers, a silent kindness overflowed with the life she insisted on continuing. Kaio, her son, grew up under the weight of an absence that spoke louder than any words. Every soccer match without applause, every graduation without hugs, every important moment of childhood carried a void that nothing filled. Deep down, Kaio cultivated an explosive mixture of insecurity, courage, and a deep thirst for understanding. He often felt abandoned, although his mind tried to find excuses for his father's disappearance. Maybe he's caught up in some adventure. Maybe he's sick. But the truth, the one that no one dared to face, was that growing up without answers left deep scars, invisible at first glance, but embedded in the heart. Humanity is sometimes brutal, and even in the midst of the wisdom of life, certain pains cling to the soul like ivy on an ancient wall. Elisa tried to fill the gaps left by absence with generous doses of affection, respect, and stories about who Lucas was, or better said, who she believed he still was. But Kaio's eyes, full of unasked questions, betrayed the open wound. At night, while the world slept, mother and son, each in their own corner, fought silent internal battles. She against the desire to give up, he against the fear of never being enough for someone to want to stay. Amidst the pain, the gratitude for life and the daily struggle, both were still driven by a stubborn spark of inspiration. Because deep down, maybe that story had not yet revealed everything. Maybe on the other side of the mystery, there was more than just longing waiting to be found. It was a day like any other in a small town forgotten by time, where gossip spread faster than the wind, and where news was as rare as rain in the backlands. But that late afternoon, a commotion took over the main square. A dirty, disoriented man with a lost look had appeared out of nowhere, as if carrying the weight of entire lives on his shoulders. He spoke little, confused names and mixed up dates. The loneliness emanating from him was almost palpable, and even amidst the suspicion and fear of onlookers, there was something there that aroused empathy and a strange compassion. The local police, not knowing what to do, decided to act with the kindness that the situation called for. They offered him shelter, clean clothes, and an attempt to understand who this man was, who seemed to have forgotten even himself. The news spread like wildfire. In a world where social media turns strangers into headlines in seconds, the story quickly gained prominence. Man with no memory found after decades of being lost, the headlines read. Onlookers and journalists speculated, was he an ordinary wanderer? A fugitive? A survivor of some forgotten tragedy? Doubt fueled both fear and hope. It was then that someone had the idea of doing a DNA test, a practical measure, a light in a sea of assumptions. The result came like a bolt of lightning. It was Lucas. Yes, the same Lucas who had disappeared without a trace 30 years earlier. The same Lucas who for many was just another forgotten statistic of unsolved cases. When the confirmation came, the shock was so great that it seemed to reverberate in every corner of the old city where it all began. Elisa, already old, received the news with a heartbreaking mix of love, fear, and understanding. Kaio, now an adult, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. How to react? How to fill 3 decades of emptiness in a single breath? There was an avalanche of questions, pent-up hurts, contradictory feelings exploding in waves of emotion and inspiration. And while the world looked at Lucas as a living mystery, for those who loved him he was much more. He was the personification of a wound that now needed to be touched so that perhaps it could begin to heal. But the greatest adventure was just beginning. The reunion was anything but simple. In the cold hall of the community center, where they improvised the meeting, time seemed to stand still. When Lucas entered, with timid steps and lost eyes, the silence weighed more than any words. Elisa, now with her face marked by the passage of decades and her heart divided between gratitude and guilt, could barely stand. Her eyes, drunk with love, loneliness, and fear, stared at the man she had once loved and who was now a stranger. Caio, in turn, faced that moment as an internal hurricane. He felt anger, confusion, a certain relief that mixed with pain. The boy, who had waited for his father for years, still existed inside him, but now covered in scars that time had not erased. It was a meeting of wounded souls trying to recognize themselves in a broken mirror. Elisa carried in her chest the suffocating guilt of having moved on. Yes, she had rebuilt her life, remarried, tried to find hope in another way. But there, before that empty gaze that had once loved her, she felt as if she had betrayed Lucas's memory. The understanding and wisdom she had acquired over the years taught her that she could not blame herself for surviving. But her heart, oh, her heart insisted on being less rational. The kindness she had cultivated within herself impelled her to approach him slowly, touching Lucas's hand with a timid gesture, full of affection and respect. And when she touched him, she felt, even without knowing how to explain it, that a part of him was still reacting, like a live ember hidden under thick ashes. Lucas, on the other hand, was a castaway rescued from a sea of oblivion. Without memories to guide him, he saw before him strangely familiar faces, which awakened in him a diffuse inspiration, an instinctive desire to trust. He did not understand what he felt. The past for him was an insurmountable fog, and the present, a minefield of emotions he couldn't name. In Caio's gaze, he saw something that hurt without knowing why. A mixture of sincerity, courage, and a deep wounded humanity. In Elisa's touch, he felt the old warmth of a lost home. It was too much for an amnesiac heart to carry. And, even without words, even without memories, Lucas felt that in some mysterious way, the true adventure of reconciliation and forgiveness was just beginning. In the days that followed the reunion, the questions gave no respite. They hung in the air like a storm ready to break. Why did Lucas disappear? Where had he been all this time? How could someone simply disappear from the world and return 3 decades later as if time were a blur? Doctors, psychologists, journalists, everyone tried to find explanations. Theories about deep traumas, dissociative memory disorders, and even neurological accidents were raised. Some experts spoke of extreme retrograde amnesia, a rare but not impossible condition. Despite technical analyses and attempts at rational understanding, no answer seemed to satisfy the existential void that the situation created. It was a mystery in which the wisdom of science and the understanding of the heart fought silent battles. Lucas, sitting through long sessions of questions and exams, felt more and more like a stranger in his own skin. It was like leafing through a book written in a language he could no longer read. The memories did not return, not even in fragments. Only disconnected flashes, the sound of rain hitting rooftops, the smell of cornmeal cake, a childish laugh that echoed among his thoughts. He carried a silent pain, a loneliness that he could not explain. Deep down, he felt that there was something bigger, something inexplicable, guiding that strange chapter of his existence. Something that did not fit into medical explanations, something closer to spirituality, to the mystery of humanity. It was as if a part of him held a secret, but lacked the key to access it. Meanwhile, Elisa and Caio struggled to deal with the weight of what they did not know. Each attempt to recover memories was an exercise in empathy, respect, and also courage. Sometimes, Caio would show old photos in the hope of rekindling some spark, while Elisa would tell stories from their youth, as if words could reconstruct what time had erased. In each gesture, there was an attempt at reconciliation and also a silent acceptance that they might never know the whole truth. Lucas was now a living unknown, and paradoxically a source of inspiration about the power of starting over, of forgiveness, and the human capacity to embrace the unknown. And although everyone tried to move on, they knew that deep down, there was still more to come. It happened suddenly without warning in a silent dawn. Lucas woke up with a start, his body sweating coldly, his eyes wide open, as if he were escaping from an old nightmare. Little by little, small flashes began to pierce the fog of amnesia. A deserted road wound under a heavy sky. Muffled screams echoed in the distance. The strong smell of gasoline permeated the air. An unknown man with a cloudy face appeared and disappeared like a shadow. These images came in disordered spasms, leaving Lucas even more confused and frightened. Understanding the situation came in bitter doses. His past was not a field of flowers. It was a minefield of traumas, mysteries, and deep pain. Fear began to grow inside him, but so did an instinctive need to know the truth. Each fragment that emerged added more pieces to a dark puzzle, but without offering the relief of a solution. Lucas tried to hold on to the memories like someone trying to hold water in their hands, and they ran away, fast and treacherously. In his therapy sessions, he described the smell of gasoline as something oppressive, an invisible threat. The therapist suggested that he could have been the victim of a kidnapping or some kind of violent accident, but nothing was conclusive. For Lucas, it was like being stuck between two realities, the new life he was trying to build and an old story full of insecurity, loneliness, and darkness that threatened to pull him back in. It took courage to keep digging, to face whatever the past held, no matter how scary it was. Meanwhile, Caio and Elisa watched, between hope and concern, Lucas's silent struggle against his own ghosts. It was painful to see him like this, a man adrift, searching for fragments of himself amid waves of love, sincerity, and humility. And, yet, there was something inspiring in the way he persisted. Each small advance, each recovered memory was celebrated as a silent victory, a small flame of kindness lit in the vastness of the night. But deep down, everyone felt Lucas's story was not just a story of disappearance. It was something bigger, darker, something that, when revealed, could change everything they thought they knew about that man and his past. Disturbed by the flashes of his father and moved by a mixture of courage, love, and compassion, Caio decided he could not stand still. Armed with a thirst for the truth and a curiosity that had only sharpened over time, he began to search through old police records, forgotten reports, and dusty archives from neighboring police stations. It was a tense dive into a sea of yellowed papers and uncomfortable silences. It was in a stuffy room in an old public archive that he found the first clues, reports of mysterious disappearances of men around the same time and region as Lucas had disappeared. Caio's eyes shone with a mixture of inspiration and fear. Something much bigger than an escape or an accident was unfolding there, and he felt deep down that his search was only just beginning. The more Caio investigated, the more the truth emerged, and it was much darker than anyone could have imagined. Hidden among neglected police reports and ignored testimonies, the name of a cruel scheme emerged: human trafficking. Healthy men were kidnapped, deprived of their documents, forced to work on clandestine farms, factories of horrors, in conditions so inhumane that any trace of identity was forcibly erased. The smell of gasoline in Lucas's flashes now made a cruel sense. It was used to destroy evidence, to eliminate traces. The discovery filled Caio with a cold rage, but also with a strong sense of empathy and respect for the invisible suffering his father had endured. It was as if each piece revealed was a stifled cry finally found. Telling all of this to Lucas was one of the most delicate moments of Caio's life. With kindness and understanding, he narrated the discoveries, without hiding the pain, but trying to protect his father from a new avalanche of guilt. Lucas, with silent tears in his eyes, listened without interrupting. Each word seemed to ignite within him the forgotten memory of his own struggle. There was emotion, there was gratitude, but also a new type of inspiration, the desire to give, new meaning to his own story. He wasn't a coward who had abandoned his family. He was a victim, a survivor. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt that maybe, just maybe, he could still build something beautiful from the ruins of the past, something that would begin to take shape in a way that would make him happy. The truth, when it finally revealed itself in its entirety, was crueler than any previous assumption. Lucas had not abandoned his family. He had not fled out of cowardice or weakness. He had been torn from his home, from his life, and thrown into a hell hidden from the world's view. For years, Lucas had been imprisoned in an isolated place, a forgotten farm between unreachable mountains and valleys, where men were reduced to mere work instruments, without documents, without a name, without even the right to their own memory. The conditions were so inhumane that to speak of respect, affection, or kindness in that place would almost be an insult. There, humanity was suffocated every day. And the worst, when he escaped, Lucas was no longer the same. His memory, undone, like sand between his fingers, had been almost completely lost. As Elisa heard this terrifying story piece by piece, her chest felt like it was tearing apart. All the guilt, all the repressed hurt were transformed into overwhelming understanding and compassion. Caio, who had often secretly harbored resentment over his father's absence, now saw his father with new eyes, eyes of hope, inspiration, and profound gratitude for his silent courage to survive. Lucas's story was one of immeasurable loss, but also of fierce courage that had endured where many would have succumbed. It was painful to accept that so many decades of life had been stolen from them, but it was also comforting to know that in the end, abandonment had never existed. The promise of unconditional love had survived even the absence. The family's image of Lucas, previously fragmented between anger and longing, was now reconfigured into something much more powerful. He was not just the man who disappeared. He was the man who, against all odds, had found his way back. A true testament to the power of goodness that still exists, even in the midst of horror. His presence, even surrounded by visible and invisible scars, became a living symbol of reconciliation and forgiveness. And without needing big words, without promising the world, Lucas showed that true human greatness lies in resisting, in surviving, and in, somehow, keeping alive the flame of sincerity, humility, and love, even when everything seems to want to extinguish it. Freedom, which had seemed like an unattainable prize, now presented itself to Lucas as a brutal dilemma. Being free also meant facing the consequences of lost time. He knew he couldn't simply go back and retake what life had already shaped in his absence. He felt that if he insisted on staying, he could cause even more pain to those he had learned to love even from a distance. But on the other hand, every fiber of his being wanted to rebuild what had been destroyed, even if it was just a little bit. Moved by a mixture of hope, courage, and humility, Lucas proposed a meeting with Caio. No rush, no empty promises. Just father and son, face to face, like two survivors trying to find a common path among the rubble of the past. On the edge of a silent lake, where the water reflected the sky like a cracked mirror, Lucas and Caio sat side by side. The silence between them was heavy, but it was not empty. It was full of unasked questions, of heavy words of love, understanding, respect, and inspiration. Lucas, with a choked voice, confessed his fears. "Maybe the best thing for you is for me to go my own way." And it was at that moment that Caio, with his eyes full of tears, responded with a strength that mixed pain and kindness. "I don't know how to rebuild this, but I know I want to try." There were no promises of happy endings, no illusions that everything would be the same as before. There was only a raw, almost sacred sincerity between them, and above all, the genuine desire to start over. The conversation did not erase the wounds, but it opened a new door, that of reconciliation. For the first time, Lucas understood that rebuilding was not about trying to relive the past, but building something new on top of it, respecting the scars, embracing the imperfections. On the edge of that lake, father and son silently planted a new seed of affection, trust, and the power of kindness. The future was still an uncertain adventure, full of challenges, insecurity, and perhaps even setbacks. But what mattered was that, at that very moment, they chose each other above fear. And little did they know that the next step on this journey would require even more courage and faith. Lucas and Caio understood, after many silent conversations and looks filled with everything that words could not translate, that there was no point in trying to rebuild what was lost. Some losses are irreparable, and that does not mean that new forms of love and understanding cannot blossom. They decided together that they would start from scratch, not as father and son trying to relive the past, but as two men, two souls marked by life, that hope, inspiration, and the power of kindness had united again. The decision did not come without pain, without fear, without insecurity, but it came with the sincere courage of those who choose, despite everything, to bet on what can still be built with respect, sincerity, and a lot of humility. On a clear morning, without the constraints of what could have been, they went together to a simple plot of land, where the earth was fertile and the silence said more than 1,000 speeches. There, they chose a space, dug a hole, and, with their hands dirty with mud and their eyes shining with contained emotion, planted a small tree sapling. Each hoe of earth thrown with care represented a silent vote of trust, kindness, and reconciliation. There was no audience, no applause, just the two of them, side by side, committed to caring for that life that was emerging, just as they would care for the new story they were beginning to write, full of affection, and without the intention of erasing what was left behind. As they watered the sapling, with the water from the earth and the water that dripped from their eyes, they felt a discreet, almost shy peace blossom within them. It was not a happy ending from a fairy tale. It was something better, a real, human, imperfect new beginning, but full of compassion and gratitude. The tree was small, almost fragile, just like the bond they were re-establishing, but they both knew that with time, care, and a lot of love, it could grow strong enough to withstand the storms. And who knows, one day, under the shade of that tree, they could laugh at what they were, be proud of what they had become, and celebrate the incredible adventure of having chosen, above pain and fear, the path of love and hope. And now tell me with all sincerity, how many unfinished stories do you carry within you? How many reunions, how many requests for forgiveness, how many seeds of reconciliation are there, waiting for you to have the courage to take the first step? Lucas's journey teaches us that no matter how much time passes or how wounded the heart is, there is always a way back when empathy, compassion, and hope are greater than fear. Don't you also have something or someone that deserves a new chance? Isn't it time to embrace your story with more humility, confidence, and affection, leaving behind the shackles of loneliness and resentment? Life is too short to leave love trapped in silence and kindness dormant. If there's one thing this story proves to us, it's that the inspiration to change is always within us, just waiting for a gesture to blossom. If this story touched your heart, if it awakened in you the desire to be a better person, to live with more gratitude, respect, and purpose, then don't waste any more time. Subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications and come continue this journey with us. Here, each story is an invitation for you to live your life with more truth, more love, and more faith in the new beginnings that life still has in store for you.